Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we've got a fun conversation to have as we're going to talk about some different players that the Jaguars could go out, trade for before the season to really take this roster to the next level. You know, if you followed me throughout this offseason, I've felt like they've made a lot of good moves. I think they made some bad moves as well. And at the end of the day, this has led to a very talented roster that I think really just needs a few more jolts to reach that next status. And then you got some other questions too, right? We talked about that recently on the channel, but we're going to talk about some players that I think could change the course of this season. Players that I think could mitigate weaknesses that might show up during the season. So I've got four guys. We're going to talk about some bigger names here. We are not going to focus on smaller guys like let's go trade for Peyton Turner from the Saints, who is on a rookie deal, hasn't been that great. Maybe he'd be better here. We're not going to talk about those kinds of guys. We're going to talk about legit players, you know, veteran guys for the most part that are going to make an impact on this team in a role. So with that said, we're going to jump into it. We're going to go from our smallest to our biggest guys here as far as additions. Maybe not size, though, because we're starting with DeMarcus Lawrence. So for this trade, just to start this out, DeMarcus Lawrence has one more year left on his deal right now. There was some talk earlier this offseason that maybe the Cowboys would move on, maybe they would cut him, maybe they would trade him, maybe something would happen. Has not happened to this point, but I think the conversation's at least there. He is currently on a one-year deal worth $10 million for the new team. So that is with some money being left with Dallas because they pushed them down the road. That happens with signing bonuses, completely normal. But for Jacksonville, this is a one-year, $10 million deal. I think this probably gets done with an early day 3 pick, which you have a very early day 3 pick most likely with that 4th round pick from Minnesota. So looking a little bit into DeMarcus Lawrence as a player and what he'd bring to Jacksonville, we'll take a look at PFF stats for this. But DeMarcus Lawrence, he is a long-time veteran, right? 32 years old. You can see here, first season in the NFL was in 2014. He is going into his 11th season as a player. He is a veteran for the Dallas Cowboys right now. As a veteran, you might not see a ton of stats that pop out here, but you will see that he grades very well. This will be one of those guys that he might not have those plays that always get on a highlight reel, but he's consistently doing his job at a high level. So we're looking at, you know, this last year, 4 sacks. I think that's obviously not really the bar you want to set, but at the same time, like, he's been effective as a pass rusher. He's been very good as a pass rusher. Sometimes it just doesn't show up. Sometimes you just don't get the sacks. For example, Trayvon Walker last year, I believe, came in at 59 pressures. He ended up having 10 sacks he was involved on, maybe more. So you look at that, you consider here you got 4, sometimes there's disparity there. But he's getting pressure on the quarterback. He's generally, I think, a good enough tackler. A little bit below average you'd see here, but you got a few games where that happens, right? I don't know if he has this many snaps with the team, but that's going to be something that probably goes down over time. But I do think that he would be a really nice piece as a third edge rusher, someone that can be a veteran, help bring up Trayvon Walker, someone who's going to be great to put on the field when you're pulling one of your guys, or even, we've heard a little bit about this, maybe when someone kicks inside. Because we know earlier this offseason we heard Ryan Nielsen is asking Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker to be ready to move inside on some plays. So I think DeMarcus Lawrence would be a really logical option for the Jaguars if they want to round out that room. It's a room, to me, that has a lot of high-end talent on the top, right? Obviously. You got Josh Allen, who is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, but probably will end up being one of the best players in Jaguars history, maybe even the best, we'll see. But you've also got Trayvon Walker there. First overall pick, a player who has gotten better consistently throughout his career, but still more to prove. You know, because I think the narratives on him kind of falls in the middle, right? The people who say, yeah, he walked ass backwards into 10 sacks and he sucks, like, that's not real, right? That's a bunch of crap. But at the same time, it is fair to say that some of these sacks aren't as impressive as maybe other players. And so I think he's definitely improved. I think he's falls somewhere in the middle of that, and he's one of the best edge rushers. I don't think he's that right now. So I think you need to add another player, because behind that you got Travis Gibson, who is, someone that maybe has some potential, but also right now just a preseason warrior to this point. We'll see what he is this season, but there's questions there. Yasir Abdullah is a player that maybe he ends up being a good undersized pass rusher, but there's nothing to indicate that that huge step is going to be taken. I don't think you can take that risk. I think for this team, when you're talking about weaknesses, they are one injury away from potentially having a bad defensive line. Another thing as well to consider here, you're looking at these grades, the best thing that DeMarcus Lawrence did last year, at least per PFF, was defend the run. This is going to be something that I think really needs to be paid attention to, because for the Jaguars, end of the season was not good against the run. It was mainly interior play, but I think adding another guy to that defensive line that has a lot of talent against the run is important. And this allows you to, if you have an injury, let DeMarcus Lawrence start full-time on the field and help you out. And I think you can survive through that injury and still have a stout defensive line. So I am very much for this move. I don't know what the exact price is. Maybe it's less than that 4th rounder. I sure don't think it's more for a 32-year-old player, but he's a good one. He'd be a great addition for Jacksonville, and I really hope at the end of the day that there is at least a big-time addition at the edge position, because they do need one. Doesn't have to be the biggest player, but someone who can get out on the field and have a little bit of an impact for us. So now let's move into our second guy here, and someone that Jaguars fans have talked about a ton. And I want to explain the contract situation here as well, because it's an interesting one, and one that's a little bit confusing compared to what you usually end up hearing. So that second guy is Marshon Lattimore. So Lattimore right now, there's a lot of speculation about what the pick is, but for a lot of these guys, it's kind of falling in that late day 2, early day 3 range. I think more realistically, it might just be that Minnesota 4th, but I went with the 3rd here because Marshon Lattimore, well, the main issue has been injuries the last couple years. He's played probably what's really a full season of snaps over 2 years. He's still a good player. He maybe hasn't done as great as he did before the contract extension, but he's still a very good player and someone that I think would probably logically take a step forward. Now, with the contract, here's what's interesting about it and why this trade would probably happen before the season, whether it's to Jacksonville or another team, most likely another team, is that there is an option bonus that is coming up to be due, and if the Saints hold on to him, they have to pay out that bonus. And so for them, kind of takes the incentive of trading him after that, because you paid all this money, you might as well keep him. Why pay $15 million, which is the bonus, and then get rid of him? Doesn't make a ton of sense. So that bonus effectively, and maybe it would change if he was traded to Jacksonville. Maybe it'd only be over these first 3 years, you see. But it's around $15 million. And you're going to have that split over all the seasons of his contract. So if they carry those 2 void years, which I would imagine they would, that's just the way they operate. They have a lot of void years they're building up right now. If that's the case, all these years get 2.8 million thrown on. So like right now, a 2024 cap hit's really like 1.2, but it'll go up because of that. That bonus will be spread out over the contract. Might actually be something similar to what we see with Trevor Lawrence's contract. We'll see that soon. Haven't got all the details yet on the specific cap hits each year. But for Marshon Lattimore, at the end of the day, what is this contract? It's really, it's obviously split over 5 years as far as cap charges, but he's here for 3 years. He's earning $51.7 million. So it is essentially a deal worth about $17.2 million a year. And I think that's kind of close, to be fair, to what we're going to see Tyson Campbell earn after this season. I think he's probably going to be someone, maybe it's a tad bit less, but probably 16, 17 million. Somewhere in between there would be my guess right now. Maybe that contract will be signed before this video even goes up, just given the fact that we've heard a lot of rumblings that Campbell is about to get extended. But we'll see, of course. So that's your situation with the Marshawn Lattimore contract and with the trade. Now, why would you trade for Marshawn Lattimore? And a lot of you guys already know the answer because a lot of you want to get Lattimore here, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that Lattimore is best in, and we'll go over to it here, is press coverage. You're not going to see that through these stats necessarily, but he is seen as one of the best press coverage cornerbacks in the NFL. He's also a very fast cornerback. He has that blazing speed you're going to look for. Ran a 4.36 at the combine. He is a very talented player, athletically and physically as well in press coverage. That is going to be what's really important for Jacksonville, is getting someone who fits the scheme, and that's what I tried to specifically look for when finding these players. Marshawn Lattimore, you go to the earlier years of his career, you see why he was extended. I honestly can't recall whether the extension took place, after his third, fourth year, or fifth year, or where it fell. Probably somewhere around this 2021 season. But you see, before the injuries and when his snap counts went down because of that, he was a great player. He was performing very well. He's a great run defender. I think you see sometimes when people get hurt, don't do as well in that category. So I think he's better than these numbers, where 60 is average usually. But he's a talented player that has shown tons of upside in everything you're going to ask a cornerback to do. And I think really it's just a matter of time until he gets back on track as a player. This was a guy, as you see here, he was the 11th overall selection. There's a lot of talent there. It ain't Jeff Okudah. This is a player who's still really, really good right now and playing at a high level when he's out on the field. Jacksonville right now, well, there's talk about, could Jerrion Jones be the guy that's starting outside, right, long term, after Ronald Darby? I don't think that's his best role. I think he's a slot corner. That's what I got out of the evaluation, and I think realistically, he's probably the guy that you groom on his rookie deal behind Darnell Savage, and maybe in the long term, you look to save a little bit of money and make the move to Jerrion Jones at some point. So that's kind of my thought process there with I'll say Jarrion Jones. I know it's pronounced kind of weird, different than what I originally thought, so I apologize for that. But outside, I don't think you really have that second guy long term, right? Ronald Darby's here. He should be good for the scheme. He's affordable. He's an older player, though. He's not a guy you're banking on for long term, similar to a Mitch Morse. Guys who are going to be here maybe a couple years, and then you should have an answer at that position, probably through the draft. But in this scenario, I think Lattimore is a player that you could take advantage of getting here, trying to get him for a later pick and having a top-tier player who fits the scheme. And also, by the way, someone that Ryan Nielsen's familiar with. Didn't coach him necessarily because he was the D-line coach, but he knows Marshawn Lattimore. It would make a lot of sense. Still got some good years out of him. He's 28 years old right now. I think this would be a move I'd definitely be on board with for Jacksonville, especially if they want to complete this unit and go for a deep playoff run this year, which I think making a move like this sends that message that that's what you're looking for in the 2024 NFL season. So now, having talked about Marshawn Lattimore, we're going to talk about a different press coverage cornerback, and one that I would probably prefer to sign over Lattimore for a few reasons. And that is none other than Greg Newsome II. Cleveland Browns slot cornerback right now. We've heard a lot of rumblings he wants to play outside, right? He has played over his career pretty much 50-50 inside and outside. He's said this year, though, he is fine being that versatile piece. As long as he gets to play a little bit outside, he's cool with that. And the thing with Jacksonville is that you look at what the needs are, it's an outside cornerback. That's what you're looking for. And you're wanting a press coverage guy, and Newsome is one of the very best of these young guys right now. I think when you bring him in, he's going to immediately excel in that scheme. Really, the questions around him are going to be, fully reaching that next level, right? It's going to be a little bit about run defense, because as a run defender, there's some moments, but he's mostly average to maybe a tad below average. So those will be your concerns, but I think this is a really good player. And as far as what the pick is, I originally wrote a Minnesota third here, I think that is the highest you would have to send. But I think it's also very possible that you're not having to send that. It's probably the fourth. It might be a later pick with that as well. So maybe you're talking about Minnesota's fourth, a Jacksonville sixth this next year. I could see that being enough for the trade, but there is some disparity. But if we're talking about what for sure absolutely should get the trade done right now, Minnesota third would definitely be enough from what we've heard. Probably doesn't have to be that much, though. As far as what you inherit, you inherit the last 2 years of a rookie deal, one of those years being the fifth-year option. Greg Newsome was a first-round draft pick. He was actually taken before Tyson Campbell in that same draft class. He's going to come in with a $2.5 million hit roughly that first year, and then you're going to go into that fifth-year option, which there was a lot of questions about that because the Browns didn't really know if they wanted to pay a guy who really has to be a slot cornerback for them because of the other people at the position. They have an embarrassment of riches at cornerback right now when they're healthy. They didn't know if they wanted to pay a slot guy that much. But for me, when I'm looking at this, I see if you had to play Newsome inside, you're probably playing him inside on nickel packages, and when it's not nickel, you're moving him outside. He's still a full-time player. And if he's playing at a high level, I'm okay paying him $13.5 million a year, as long as you work out on this team. And I think if you trade for a guy like this, you probably wait a year, right? You want to make sure you wait a year, you make the right decision, and then you go and extend him after that. I probably wouldn't do it right now. I think there's still a little bit of a verdict out on Greg Newsome. I just expect him to work out at the end of the day. So that's kind of what you're looking at for what you would give up, and then what you're looking at as far as cap hits. So it's really about $15.8 million over 2 years, so roughly $8 million a year. Now, we'll go ahead, we'll take a look at PFF, and I'm going to pull up something else just to show you, give you an idea of how he is as a man coverage cornerback. So I'm going to get that loading over here real quick. Didn't have this up before, so we'll fix this really quick. So cool thing with PFF here, you get a lot of these different position grades, different things you can look at. I like to use this a lot right now, looking for these players, because you can look at coverage scheme on here. You can see how well someone does in man, how well someone does in zone. For example, recently one of the things I looked at was Trey Herndon, because he was signed essentially what seems like for a veteran minimum contract. So it was a question of, hey, if he was okay in man, probably would have brought him back. But you can see when you look at him, not that great in man coverage. But going to the Cleveland Browns here, you look at man coverage grades, he ends up being really the best of all the players who are out there consistently on the field. 480 snaps, ended up playing 203 or 201 in man coverage, one of those numbers. One of the best, though, in the league. If we sort by man coverage grades, and then we take, maybe you had to play 50% of this. Let's, 50% works. He ends up being 13th on this list with some really good names above him, right? I mean, we're talking about guys like Tariq Woolen, Sauce Gardner, Trent McDuffie, some really good young players, Deron Bland, Steven Nelson just retired, so you could take him off the list, and Jalen Johnson. So Newsome is one of the best guys in man coverage in the league. Now, you can see, as I spoil the last guy there really quick, you see he's played a lot in the slot this last year. Over the course of his career, when we look at snap alignments, that first year in 2021, mainly an outside guy, ended up splitting snaps in 2022. 2023, primarily a slot guy. So this has kind of changed over the course of his career, but it's more so what the Browns have needed than what Greg Newsome is best at. I think he can play both at a very high level, to be fair. But you see here, when you're looking at grades, like, there's some bad games, right? There's some question marks in there. But there's a lot of high-end games, too. And so it's really about just getting him to consistently play at that high level. You take a little bit of a risk with him when you're signing him. You also got a little bit of injury concern. But that drives the price down. Because if it wasn't for those things, Greg Newsome's probably worth that second-round pick. You're probably giving up a lot more to go get him. But this is an affordable, young player who's very good at what you're going to ask him to do, and probably, if I had to guess, going to take that next step over this year, and if not, the next year on that rookie deal. So I'm very much on board with Greg Newsome. If we're talking about what players out of these four guys we're going to discuss that you would want to trade for, I think Newsome is probably highest on that list as far as what you give up and what you get back in return. I think he'd be a phenomenal addition and really round out that room. And you put him in a spot that he wants to be in. He wants to play outside, ideally. He'll do it all if he needs to. But I think it makes a ton of sense, right? And if he got injuries in the slot, he can kick inside. He is a versatile player who's going to do it all, hopefully at a very high level. Now, let's get into the final guy here. And we're going to talk about a Cincinnati Bengal. It's not going to be T. Higgins, but it's going to be Trey Hendrickson. Now, I do not know 100% for sure if he's traded. I would kind of doubt it right now. But this is the trade where, for me, if you want to try to make a deep run this year, if you really mean it, if you want to go all in, which I'm personally in the camp, like, if I'm looking at this before the offseason, I don't want to do that. I want to build through the draft. I want to save some money. I want to get rid of these future cap charges for players that aren't even going to be on the team at the time. That would have been my stance and has been my stance. But with the direction they've gone, really finding a lot of veteran starters, not really focusing on that throughout the draft, maybe looking for more long-term pieces there, this would make sense to fit what they've done. You look at Trey Hendrickson, how he is as a player. It's one of the best pass rushers in the league. He matched Josh Allen's sack total, I believe, from last year, had 17.5. So this is a guy who would come in, he would immediately be the guy opposite of Josh Allen. You still have Trayvon Walker out there, not saying he's benched or something, but you could have a very heavy rotation for all three of these guys, keep them fresh, and if someone goes down, you're fine. And the nice thing with Trey Hendrickson, I don't think he's a guy that's going to demand the absolute most he can out of a team. I think he wants a little bit of a raise, to be fair, because he quite frankly deserves it. But more so right now, some of the issue around his trade request he made was about guarantees. He wants to know that if he gets injured, he's not just getting canned at the end of the season. And so I think that's something that if you're trading for him, you'd happily oblige to. It's one of the best edge rushers in the league. Why would you say no? It's 2 years. It's not like you're guaranteeing 6 and he's an older player. But with Trey Hendrickson, to get him from Cincinnati, especially in a year where Cincinnati seems to be all in, right? They're not trading T. They're probably going to have to give him up next offseason without getting anything more in a comp pick in return, because the franchise tag probably won't be an option. With all those things considered, I think you got to send a lot to make them budge. I think it's going to be hard to do it. But if you want to make your run this year and you're looking for the right players, Trey Hendrickson would make a lot of sense because, hey, not only are you getting a great pass rusher, you might take a guy that hurts one of the teams you'll have to go through in the playoffs. And for them, they might just want to get the pick out of it now. And the second round pick's pretty valuable. But you see with Jacksonville, these picks after the first round have been very questionable. Hopefully they hit on them from this last year. I'm not saying they all missed necessarily, but we'll see. It definitely has been a question mark, though. Now, as far as what he's earning, right, this is more of a conversation here because you got to talk about giving him more guarantees, probably giving him a bit of a raise. Right now, he's slotted at $31 million over these next 2 years as far as his earnings. I did a little bit of restructure here. So went back through what I thought he'd probably get with a new team. This is where you land. I think for Jacksonville, they're probably going to go out and add on a bunch of void years if they're doing this deal, because this is a deal to try to get the team competitive now. They probably want to push it out over a long period of time as far as when the cap charges go, just to help them out, not go way over the cap at this moment. But I think you're probably going up to at least $40 million a year, maybe more. And hey, if it's more, I think Hendrickson's still a little bit worth it, but maybe the picky I give up goes down in that case. But essentially what I did here was you gave him a $15 million signing bonus, and $9 million of that is additional money. So $6 million of that 31 converted to signing bonus, another $9 million thrown on, and then lower that cap hit for 2024 a bit. And really what you're looking at is the cap hits over those 2 years he's playing here on this contract end up being the same in total, but you're essentially just adding on 3 years where you're paying $3 million to a player who's not on the team in void years. But taking a look at some of the statistics with Trey Hendrickson here, so you guys can see that. Let me pull that up real quick. Here we go. So Trey Hendrickson, turning 30 years old this year, still got a lot in the tank, right? He's played at a very high level for the Bengals, taking a lot of snaps. You know, you see consistently, you know, other than maybe a little bit of a streak where wasn't playing as well, he's still grading out very consistently above average, playing very well, getting a lot of sacks. He was involved on 20 sacks. The way they do this on PFF is a half sack counts as one, because their logic is that, you know, even if there was another guy reaching the quarterback, if he wasn't there, you're just going to get the sack yourself, and they just assume you would wrap up, which a little bit flawed of logic, but I think still relatively fair. But Trey Hendrickson's a player that you look at every category here, you know, not someone who's going to drop out in coverage, not someone who's maybe going to be a great run defender. Maybe that's where you see Trayvon Walker come more into the rotation, but someone who's going to be a hell of a pass rusher, you know, grading out almost every single one of these games with an elite grade, up in the 90s. And you see that throughout his career the last few years. He has been incredible with the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a player that if you can snag him, if you can find a way to go get him, I think this would make sense as a move to elevate this team and to go into this year and be a deep playoff contender, to legit maybe be the favorite for the division. I don't want them to be considered the favorite, to be fair, because they don't deal well with expectations, but I think they could be if they made a move like this, because that gets you closer to where a team in Houston that has really spent a crap ton of money this offseason, it gets you closer to where they are. But I think Trey Hendrickson would be a really nice addition, especially just if you can get him on the field primarily in pass rush situations, let him get after the quarterback. He would be one of the best in the NFL. And maybe you get away with a little bit less than that trade I mentioned. But hey, if you want to absolutely get him, maybe you got to send that second. We'll see, of course. But those are the guys that I've got for this video. I think that right now for the Jaguars, like we talked about in the questions for this upcoming season, there are some concerns to have, right? There's positions like edge rusher where there's not really anything behind the starters. What happens if Ronald Darby goes down? Is Jarion Jones going to play well outside? You've got questions on the offensive line where, hey, if a guy gets injured, is Luke Fortner going back out there? Is Tyler Shatley got to start? Is he still good? You know, he is getting older. Nothing against him, but that just naturally happens. You're going to have some questions like that. I don't think there's a ton. There's surely things I disagree with in the way the team's been built, but I think they've got a few little holes that they can kind of patch up before the season to make sure that they are ready for what hopefully can be a deep playoff run. And I think these are players that can do it because, hey, you know, honestly, whether or not I agree with every player on the offensive line, it's not really a player that you can replace right now. Maybe Cam Robinson, but doesn't make a lot of sense. You'd rather renegotiate the contract. Everyone's set in stone on that unit. So I think pass rush unit and I think the cornerback room are probably the two areas you're looking. I think there's opportunities out there. And at the end of the day, I mean, for the Jaguars, it comes down to if they can get a good deal, because they will not make these deals if they got to give up a lot. That's why I don't think they would actually go trade for Trey Hendrickson. I think that's unlikely. I think if you're looking at players on this list, I think the Area 3 would make a lot of sense, though. I think those are guys they could come down with. One thing to note, on Greg Newsome, there was some talk that because the fifth-year option was accepted, that Cleveland's locked in with him. I do not think that's the case. It is simply a situation where they had to make that decision. And if they are going to have him on their team, they would just extend him that year, and that's another year where they could go out and trade him anyway. I don't think that says that they are locked in with him, because that money, it's not guaranteed that Cleveland's going to pay that. It is guaranteed that he will earn it, but if they trade him, Cleveland's not stuck with the cap charge. That's what I'm trying to get at here. So Greg Newsome, I think, is still very much available. I think Lattimore is on a timetable. And I think Lawrence is a player that, if Dallas is going to keep him this year, they'll keep him. But if someone sends him an offer that's decent, I think Dallas would take it. I think he's a player who's very much available on the trade block, whether or not he's actively being shopped. So, hey, that's all I've got for today. I appreciate you guys watching. Next video we'll have out, assuming this is out before, I imagine it is. We will be going back to summer scouting. Took a week off just because it's a lot of prospects in this next group. But we're going to be looking at defensive backs. We'll be looking at cornerbacks. We'll be looking at safeties. Some guys that could make sense in Jacksonville, and a lot of great, talented players at the top. But we're going to be looking at that 2025 class a little bit more. It'll be our last, super long video. I don't expect people to watch the whole thing. It's going to come out to probably almost 2 hours. But that content will be there for you guys. So that's our plan. We'll keep having content over this off season, but I appreciate you all watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.